Last year, I started driving in Spain and it made me realize how convenient having a car is. And if you move into Spain, you'll no doubt be wondering about the costs of everyday transportation, with car running costs and acquisition costs surely factoring into your calculations. The big question, of course, being how much is it going to cost you to have a car in Spain? In this video, I'm going to break down the costs of purchasing a car, running a car in Spain, as well as some alternative car usage models that could end up saving you money in the long run. Let's get right into it. If you're new here, my name is Johnny. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living and working in Spain for the past 4.5 years. And as I say, I started driving last year. And as someone who's particularly into personal finances, I like looking into the cost of things and making sure that it's not costing me more than it should. So with that said, let me tell you a little bit about owning a car in Spain. First of all, you'll of course be asking yourself, is it worth having a car in Spain? And the answer is quite clear, but it very much depends on where you're living. If you're living in a city like Madrid or Barcelona or even Valencia, where the cities have very good public transportation networks that are affordable and well connected with the rest of the city, and you're not going to venture too far outside of the city center on a regular basis, and you don't perhaps have a real need for a car, then you can perhaps get away with not having a car. And the occasions where you might need a car, if they're sporadic, we'll talk about some of the ways later in the video where you can go about using cars in that case. However, if you're living in the outsides of some of these bigger cities, perhaps you're living in a more residential neighborhood, or if you're living very much in the countryside in Spain, or maybe even near the beach in some cases, then a car is definitely worth considering, because as much as some of the bigger cities are connected by public transportation to the rural areas and more outside of the city places, then you are pretty much relying on any local transportation, which is not always, up to the same standard as city center transportation. And you might be that, the only transportation that goes there is like the intercity buses, the suburban trains, like the cercanías services, or pretty much by taxi. So in these situations, then it definitely makes sense to have a car just for the pure logistics of it. And so, like many things, to answer the question, how much does it cost to buy a car in Spain, will of course very much depend. Obviously, buying a Renault Clio will differ from buying a BMW X5 or a Tesla Model 3, for example. But to give you an idea how Spain compares with the rest of Europe, I took two cars, a Toyota Corolla and a Volkswagen Golf. So looking at the map for the Toyota, you can see that with the exception of a few outliers, namely Portugal, you can see that the price mainly follows the cost of living that one might expect in a particular country. That's to say, the Toyota Corolla can be purchased for cheaper in a lot of Eastern Europe than it can in Western Europe. However, with the Volkswagen Golf, we don't see the same trend, and what you see here is also applicable for a lot of other German brands like Mercedes, like BMW, and like Audi as well, perhaps, is that it's actually cheaper to acquire in Germany than it is in a lot of other countries. As you see on the map, it is actually more expensive in Spain, in France, in the UK to buy a Volkswagen Golf than it is in Germany. So what you do find in Spain is that in certain cases, some people do actually travel to Germany to buy German cars because they can get them for cheaper there, and then they bring them back to Spain. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. What you also got to keep in mind as well is that VAT by European country differs as well. I'll put the chart on the screen, so that can also influence the price of cars in different countries. In Spain, the VAT for cars is 21%. Now, of course, not everybody wants to buy a new car, and there are, of course, second-hand dealerships in Spain as well. And there is a website which is very popular in Spain called coches.net, which is where you can find actually, new cars as well, but a lot of second-hand cars that are on sale around the country, you can find them on there as well. And this website will give you an indicator as to whether it's a fair price, whether it's a good deal, or whether it thinks it's being overcharged based on other adverts on the website. Very important that you do ask for all the documents when purchasing a second-hand car, namely the ficha técnica, which is like the history, the technical history of the car, when it's been to the garage for maintenance, if it's had any accidents in the past. Also important to get a copy of the permiso de circulación, which is like the road permit, basically, that the car is roadworthy and able to go on the car. Different from the MOT, which I'll talk about again a bit later in the video. And another good source to check is the DGT website. Now, this is the Dirección General de Tráfico. It's basically like, if you're coming from the UK, the DVLA equivalent, or if you're coming from the US, the DMV equivalent in Spain. So on the DGT website, you can request reports on a particular car, looking at the registration plate, and they'll again be able to give you information on the car, such as the mileage, the kilometers on the car, again, if it's been involved in accidents, if there's anything outstanding against the car. So this report can help you identify if what the seller is telling you is true, and if there's anything that doesn't quite match up versus what's on the DGT website. So let's come back to our discussion about going to another EU country to buy a car. Now, you can do this. As I say, a lot of people in Spain go to Germany to buy German cars and then bring them back to Spain. Of course, factor in the cost of, traveling there. You're going to put at least 2,000 kilometers on the car in bringing it back. You'll have to pay for the petrol, etc. You'll need some maybe temporary license plates whilst bringing bringing it back to Spain as well, because you'll of course need to register the car in Spain, but it could perhaps save you some money, particularly if you're buying a very high-end car where the cost is quite significant. And when it comes to VAT as well, you'll pay VAT in the country where you are going to register the car. So even though a car might cost more in Germany because the VAT percentage is higher, because you're bringing it back to Spain, you'll essentially pay VAT in Spain on that car. That's applicable for new cars. In the case of second-hand cars, whether you're buying in Spain or from another EU country and bringing it to Spain, you'll pay what's called Impuesto sobre Transmisiones Patrimoniales, which I've talked about in property videos. The same applies with cars. It's basically like a second-hand asset transmission tax. And this depends again on the autonomous community, but it'll typically be from 6 to 10%. You can also buy a car from outside the EU or bring a car from outside the EU to Spain. The additional step here is that that car has to go through customs. Let's just make up an example. Let's say I'm buying a car in the UAE and I'm bringing it to Spain. Then I have to pay the VAT in Spain, but I also have to pay a 10% customs tax as well. However, in the case that it's a change of residency, that's to say you already own the car and you are living in another country and you're now relocated to Spain, then you don't have to pay the VAT or the custom tax, but the car does still need to go through customs and be registered following the proper process. As this is something I've never done and it might end up being complex depending on your situation, I would still recommend speaking to a professional if this is something you're considering doing. All right, now assuming that we purchase a car, how much is it going to cost to run on an annual basis in Spain? So first of all, we have road tax, known as the Impuesto de Circulación, which, to cut a long story short, is based on the emissions of the car and the size of the engine. It uses units called caballos físicos, so which I can't even figure out how to translate, but again, based on the engine power, it determines this. And then based on how many caballos fiscales comes out in the calculation for your car, that will determine the road tax you have to pay. Now, typically it will range from 59 euros up to 180 euros per year. There are discounts for electric cars, and that can mean that you end up paying kind of at the lower end of that scale, around 50, 60 euros per year. Next, you got insurance, which again depends on a whole host of factors, so very difficult to give a concrete figure here. But looking at some data from Quelisto, which is a comparison website in Spain, they determined that the average insurance cost ranges from about 750 euros to 900 euros per year. There are different types of insurance here in Spain. You have comprehensive insurance, which is known as the Seguro Todo Riesgo, which the data found on average costs 2,500 euros per year, but can be found starting from 600 to 800 euros, again depending on the car and the insurer. You then have third-party plus insurance, which is on average 506 euros, but has been found starting from 300 to 400 euros. And finally, you have basic third-party insurance, which is about 411 euros on average, but can be found starting as low as 150 to 200 euros. I'll put some price comparison websites for car insurance in the link for you guys if you want to put your car's details in and find out how much it would cost to insure it as well. Next, let's talk about parking. So something that you shouldn't overlook. So in the big cities like Madrid and Barcelona, there are systems in place for residents. So in Madrid, you can register as a resident in the center of the city, and it will basically cost you 24 euros and 60 per year. And that will allow you to park in the green parking bays. So you'll see the green lines on the road. That means that those parking spaces are specifically reserved for residents or like hybrid and electric cars that have specific emission stickers on the car. In Barcelona, the cost of parking for residents works out about 20 cents per day or €1 per week maximum. So if you're, parking as a resident of Barcelona for the whole year, you can probably expect about a 52 euro parking bill. If you're renting an apartment, particularly the newer apartment blocks as well, they also come with private parking features. So these can be included as part of the rental contract, or you can even rent a parking space in a private parking that is not necessarily your own apartment. And again, depending on where you are in the country, big cities, let's say Madrid, Barcelona, depending on the size of the space, might be 90 euros to 150 euros per month. In some of the smaller cities, it might be 70 to 110 euros per month, roughly. You can find parking spaces to rent on the likes of Idealista and Fotocasa. Again, I'll put the links in the video description in case you guys want to have a look for where you're looking. The most cost effective, without doubt, though, are the white zones known as Zona Blanca, which means it's free parking, basically. The catch with this, though, is that in city centers where there is white zone parking, it's often very packed and very difficult to find a space. So that can be a significant challenge. Granted, it's free. Now let's talk about the MOT, so the annual checkup on the car, known as the ITV in Spanish. Between the age of 4 and 10 years old, the car will need to pass its ITV every 2 years. And from the 10th year, since it's first been registered to drive on the road, it will have to pass it every year. And the cost of the ITV in Spain, it depends on the autonomous community. It typically ranges between 30 and 50 euros, and again, depends on what kind of car you have. That's assuming, of course, there's no repairs repairs or any maintenance needed for the car to pass it. Cheapest autonomous community is the Balearic Islands, which typically ranges about 20 to 30 euros per car. And in Madrid and Murcia, it's worth noting that the ITV prices are actually regulated by the different ITV centers, so not by the autonomous communities. And they typically range at the higher end, so probably 40 to 60 euros is what you can expect to pay, again, depending on what car you have in Madrid or Murcia. And last, whilst not technically a running cost of the car, it's something that you may unfortunately come across whilst driving, and that's fine. Now I'm just going to focus here on the speeding fines, because parking might depend on where you're parked, and then there's a whole lot of other fines, and I don't want to make this list exhaustive. Now when it comes to speed, the DGT has set out a table based on the speed of the car versus the speed limit, and essentially the fines start at 100 euros from the first one up to 20, 30 kilometers depending on the speed limit that you are over the limit. However, there's no points deducted. Yes, deducted. The system works in the opposite way in Spain from your license if you're caught speeding in this first kind of range. From there, however, starting at 300 euros, the fines go up in increments of 100 euros, and also points start being deducted from your license at that point as well. So obviously a reminder to drive safely and drive responsibly on the road to avoid fines, avoid points being deducted from your license, but also, to keep yourself and other road users safe. Now, everything I've mentioned there is about buying a car. Now, what I'm going to talk about are some alternative, not ownership necessarily, but usage methods of the car that may end up being more convenient for you. So first, let's talk about like a subscription model known as renting in Spanish, or leasing a car in Spain as well. Now, the good thing with these is that the cars are relatively new models. They'll typically start around 250, 300 euros per month. It could be 400, 500 euros again, depending on the size of the car, what model you're getting, etc. And basically you'll pay this per month. Typically there is kind of some commitment required. It might be 24 months, it might be 36 months, depending on the company and depending on what you're able to negotiate with the car company. And that will cover a lot of the insurance, typically things like maintenance, might even cover a courtesy car if your car needs to go to the garage for whatever it is. And in the case of leasing at the end of the contract, it's kind of works like a financing contract where you get to acquire the car at the end. In the case of the renting model, the subscription, then it will simply be, return the car. You won't ever own that car. So this might be good for someone who's moved to Spain, they're not sure how long they want to stay here, but a car may be a necessity while they're staying there. It gives you that flexibility, but you're not tied into owning the car and then having to try and sell it if one day you move away from Spain for whatever reason, for example. Even more flexible than that though, in Madrid, you have car sharing services. You have companies like Webull, like City with the Z, like Go2, Voltio. Think of the e-scooters that you see on the street with your mobile phone. You simply unlock them, you ride to your destination and then lock them again. It's the same concept here basically, but with a car. And it can work out very, very economical, particularly if in Madrid you just need a car on occasion. Typically there's like a small unlock fee of maybe 2 to 3 euros, and then you're paying like 20 to 40 cents per minute that you're using the car. So it can work out very, very cheap, very, very affordable. And in the case that you're using it for longer periods, like hours at a time, then they often prorata it and you end up with an hourly rate that can work out quite good depending on, how long you're using the car. So very good if you're living in the center. Public transport is good for 99.9% of the time, but maybe you need to go to a furniture shop to buy a new wardrobe or whatever, or the whole family's here and it's easier to get around in a car. In that case, a car sharing solution can be really good. And obviously you've got like the traditional car rental companies as well, like Hertz, 60, Enterprise, Europe Car. They're all available in Spain as well. And as usual, depending on the day and what kind of car you're renting, then the rates can vary. In some cases you can get really lucky and you can find a car for like 30 euros to 40 euros per day, but in some cases you'll find it at like 100 or 111 euros per day. That's been my experience in the past. I don't know what determines these prices, honestly. If someone knows in the comments, I'd really be interested in finding out. So there you go, guys. That's kind of a breakdown of the cost of owning a car in Spain. I hope you find it helpful and useful, and hopefully you'll be able to pick out what's good for you from this video, kind of work out the calculation and maybe compare it even to some of the other methods that I talked about later in the video and determine whether a car is good for you or not. Leave a comment and let me know what your decision is as well. If you've moved to Spain recently, have you decided to buy a car? Are you renting a car? How are you going about it? So next time, I'll see you on the next one, and let's get this money.